The first sign something was wrong wasn't the lights in the sky. Folks out in Mason County had seen plenty of those before: drones, experimental jets, and once, a college kid's weather balloon that spooked the sheriff so bad he declared martial law in 3 towns. No, the real warning was when the deer stopped coming down to drink from the creek. Then the coyotes went quiet. Then someone's prize bull vanished from its pen without so much as a hoofprint. That was when Old Man Harlan swore up and down that aliens had finally come to take over. Everyone laughed at him, until the lights came back, brighter than ever, buzzing over the soybean fields like a swarm of mechanical hornets. "Jesus, Mary, and John," muttered Tom Weaver, spitting his tobacco into a coffee can on the porch. "Would you look at that? That ain't no plane." His nephew, Jake, leaned forward in his rocking chair, squinting at the 3 glowing orbs weaving low across the tree-line. They moved too smooth, too deliberate. Planes wobbled, helicopters rattled. These things glided. The air around them shimmered like summer heat. "They're drones," Jake offered, but even he didn't sound convinced. Harlan, perched on the tailgate of his rust-eaten Ford, puffed his chest like a rooster. "Told ya. Aliens. Been watching us for decades. Probing cows, flashing lights. Now they're making their move." "Sure, Harlan," Tom grunted. "And Bigfoot's their ground commander." But as the orbs descended, spraying beams of blue-white light across the cornrows, every man on that porch stopped chuckling. The air smelled of ozone and burned dust. The weavers' dogs howled from their kennels, straining against their chains. Then came a sound none of them would ever forget, a metallic hum that rattled in their teeth and made the hair on their arms prickle. The aliens weren't subtle about it. A ship the size of a barn phased into existence right over Johnson's soybean field, shoving aside reality with a shimmer like someone pulling back a curtain. It wasn't a sleek saucer, either. It looked cobbled together, ugly, and mean, like a crab with too many legs and glowing blisters where windows ought to be. Panels hissed open along its underbelly, and cables snaked down, plunging into the soil like feeding tubes. A hum spread through the earth, making the ground tremble. "They're drillin'," Jake whispered. "Talking the dirt. The crops. Hell, maybe the water table." Harlan hawked a glob of spit. "They're colonizin'. Told you fools." Tom leaned forward, gripping the porch rail with knuckles white as bone. "Over my dead body they are." That was the spark. The very moment a bunch of stubborn, half-broke farmers, hunters, and drunks realized they weren't gonna let a pack of space bugs waltz in and make their county into a buffet line. The aliens hadn't chosen New York, or LA, or some big military base to flex their power. No, they picked the hills and woods of rural Kentucky, figuring it'd be easy pickings. Quiet folks. Few defenses. Who'd care if a few rednecks disappeared? But the aliens didn't know these folks. The next day the sheriff's office was swamped with calls: missing livestock, scorched fields, strange metal pods left behind like seeds. People started camping out with rifles on their porches. When the sheriff himself drove out to Johnson's field, he barely had time to radio. "What in the hell is this?" before his cruiser went dead, fried by a pulse of blue light. He staggered out coughing, swearing the ground had split open beneath the alien machine like it was sucking the soil dry. By the time the sun went down again, half the county knew something had to be done. And by something, they didn't mean calling the National Guard. The closest armory was 3 counties over, and folks around here had never been much for waiting on government cavalry. So, when night fell, Tom Weaver called a meeting at Miller's barn. It looked like a reunion of every hunter and troublemaker in Mason County. Rusted trucks lined the gravel drive. Shotguns and rifles leaned against hay bales. Camo jackets and hunting caps dotted the place like a patchwork militia. Harlan brought moonshine, Miller brought a projector screen, and someone, no one admitted who, dragged in a charred hunk of alien metal ripped off a half-buried pod. It still hissed faintly, like it was alive. Tom stood on a hay bale, hands on his hips. "All right, listen up. We got ourselves a problem bigger than coyotes in the henhouse. Whatever those things are, they're eating the land out from under us. Sheriff can't stop 'em. State troopers won't even drive past county lines. So it's down to us. Hell yeah! Someone shouted, earning a round of whoops. Jake raised a hand. But what are we supposed to do? They've got tech we can't touch. That pulse fried the sheriff's car like it was nothing. Tom nodded. True. But here's the thing, they don't know us. They don't know that out here, we don't just shoot deer and call it a day. We hunt for the challenge. We track. We bait. We sit in blinds for hours. We figure out patterns and we hit hard when it counts. He jabbed a finger at the glowing scrap of alien tech. These bastards picked the wrong county to colonize. Harlan, already tipsy on his second jar of shine, raised his rifle. I say we treat this like hunting season. A murmur rippled through the crowd. They weren't trained soldiers. They weren't armed with rockets or tanks. But they did have scoped rifles, trail cameras, bows, dogs, and more traps than any outsider could imagine. And most of all, they had the stubborn streak of people who didn't like being told their land wasn't theirs anymore. That night, under the flickering barn lights, they began to plan. The aliens had numbers. The glowing orbs spotted over the hills suggested more ships waiting their turn. But the humans had terrain, woods so thick you could lose your own cousin 2 feet away, caves riddling the limestone, rivers that flooded and carved the land into choke points. Every hunter in the barn knew those lands like their own veins. And if the aliens thought they were invisible predators, they were about to learn what humans did for fun on Saturday mornings. The first strike came quicker than anyone expected. At dawn, 2 hunters, Earl and Dusty, set up near the soybean field with their old deer blinds. They didn't fire a shot. They just watched. And what they saw was burned into them forever, spindly, insect-like creatures crawling down from the cables, clicking their mandibles, spreading glowing canisters into the soil. They moved like mantises, only taller, their skin plated in glistening green armor. Their eyes glowed faint yellow, swiveling independently like chameleons. Earl whispered, "I'll be damned." Harlan was right. Dusty licked his lips nervously. They ain't even guarding themselves. Just walking around like they own the place. Back at the barn, the hunters studied the recordings. The creatures weren't armored soldiers. They were workers. Harvesters. They assumed no one would fight back. That was their mistake. Jake leaned forward, eyes blazing. Then we hunt the hunters. And just like that, the county went to war. Traps were laid in the woods, bear traps modified with welded spikes, pits camouflaged with brush, tripwires rigged to shotguns. Old deer stands were converted into sniper nests. The farmers started digging trenches around their fields, filling them with gasoline just in case. Kids rode their bikes with walkie-talkies, running messages like it was 1863 all over again. What had started as fear was turning into something else: excitement. Challenge. The kind of thrill that made men grin as they loaded shells into shotguns and women laced their boots tighter, saying, "Hell, I can shoot better than you." The aliens thought they'd chosen a quiet, isolated patch of earth to plant their flag. But what they'd actually chosen was the one place where humans treated stalking, killing, and skinning prey as a sport. Where patience wasn't a weakness but an art. And where people didn't take kindly to anyone stealing their land. As the second night fell, the woods grew alive with eyes, human eyes, peering through scopes and binoculars, tracking every flicker of alien movement. Mason County was ready. And the aliens had no idea what was coming for them. The first shot rang out 2 hours before dawn. Earl squeezed the trigger from his deer stand, the crack of his rifle echoing across the soybean field. The bullet didn't just punch through the alien's chitin, it blew a chunk clean off, spraying luminous green fluid across the dirt. The mantis thing spasmed, screeching in a high-pitched metallic wail that made every dog in the county howl at once. The other aliens jerked their heads up, mandibles clacking in confusion. They weren't armed. They weren't expecting resistance. Earl chambered another round, hard hammering, and dropped a second one before the rest scrambled back toward their ship, retreating in frantic, clumsy leaps. Earl sat frozen, the rifle pressed to his shoulder, the smell of gunpowder sharp in his nose. "Son of a bitch," he muttered. They bleed. By the time he and Dusty made it back to Miller's barn, the whole county knew. Word traveled fast here, faster than the sheriff's old radio system. You couldn't keep a secret when half the folks had cousins in the next holler, and the other half sat on their porches with ears sharper than satellite dishes. The aliens bled. They could die. That single fact lit a fire in everyone's gut. Tom Weaver stood at the head of the barn again, his voice carrying over the crowd. You hear that? They're not untouchable. They ain't gods. They're bugs. Big ones, yeah, but bugs all the same. And what do we do with pests? Exterminate 'em, came the roar. But as the cheering settled, Jake raised his hand. Hold on. We got a problem. They're not stupid. Now they know we can hurt 'em. Next time, they won't come down unarmed. He was right. The aliens might have underestimated Mason County once, but they wouldn't twice. That night, the hunters gathered around maps spread over hay bales, lanterns flickering light across the outlines of woods and farmland. They marked sightings with thumbtacks, drew lines where trails cut into the hills, noted caves and hollows that could serve as hideouts. Miller, a wiry man with a coonhound's persistence, leaned over the map. They're spread in pods. Seen 3 more down by the river. If they're setting up a grid, they're trying to terraform. Change the soil chemistry. Tom grunted. Terraform my ass. They're poisoning it. We let 'em finish, this land won't grow a damn thing again. So we hit the pods, Jake said firmly. That plan became the backbone of Mason County's resistance. Sabotage the alien machines before they could root too deep. The first raid was clumsy as hell. A group of 10 men and women crept into the soybean field under cover of moonlight, hauling jugs of gasoline and a box of dynamite left over from somebody's granddaddy's quarry job. The pod loomed ahead, pulsing with faint blue veins like it was alive, cables dug deep into the soil. It hummed like a hive, the air around it hot and dry. Looks like a tick swollen with blood, muttered Dusty, wiping sweat from his brow. Then let's pop it, said Harlan, grinning through his missing teeth. They soaked the cables in gas, jammed sticks of dynamite under the pod's shell, and lit a rag fuse with Harlan's Zippo. For 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then the world turned white. The explosion rattled windows 3 miles away. Fire roared up, curling black smoke into the sky. The pod shrieked, a sound that wasn't metal but alive, like an animal being gutted. It split apart, spewing shards and a gush of glowing slime that hissed into the soil like acid. The hunters whooped and scrambled back into the tree line. For the first time, they felt like maybe, just maybe, they could win. But the aliens learned fast. The next morning, the crab-like mothership rose higher into the sky, its legs retracting, and a new sound rolled across the valley, a low, pulsing thrum that made every bone vibrate. Smaller ships spilled out like hornets, sweeping the hills with scanning beams. Jake watched from the ridge, binoculars pressed to his eyes. Well, shit, he muttered. They're mad. The hornet ships moved fast, darting through the trees with eerie precision. Where they found movement, they unleashed blue fire. Not normal fire, plasma that cut through barns and tractors like butter. In one morning, 3 farms were reduced to blackened husks. A family barely made it out of their house before it was slag. The hunters regrouped at Miller's barn, the air thick with smoke and fury. This wasn't a game anymore. They torched the Crawfords' place. Miller growled. Little Jenny barely got out with her mama. You gonna sit around talking strategy while they roast our people alive? Tom slammed his fist on the hay bale. Damn right we fight. But we fight smart. They got beams, we got cover. They can scan for heat, but we know every inch of these woods. And last I checked, trees don't light up on thermal. That gave Jake an idea. What if we fight like ghosts? The room quieted. Jake leaned over the map, his finger tracing the thickest forested parts of the county. We stay under canopy. We mask our heat, mud, river water, hell, even those old foil blankets and hunting kits. We hit 'em where they're weakest. Not head on. From the shadows. It made sense. These folks weren't soldiers trained for open battle. They were hunters who lived by patience, camouflage, and ambush. If the aliens thought they could scorch the land and flush them out, they had another thing coming. The next few days turned Mason County into a patchwork war zone. Hunters smeared themselves with mud, hid under fallen logs, and waited for hours with rifles steady. When a hornet ship zipped low, they'd spring up, firing at its exposed underbelly. One team even strung steel cables between trees, and when a ship barreled through, it sliced open like a gutted deer. The aliens started arming their worker creatures, handing them glowing rifles that spat searing bolts. But that only made the game more dangerous, not unwinnable. For every farm they torched, the hunters ambushed 3 patrols. For every pod they planted, another went up in flames before dawn. Still, the cost was rising. Earl took a bolt to the chest one night, saved only by the cast iron skillet strapped under his jacket, a skillet his wife had packed. Just in case. He lived, but the burn scar across his ribs would never fade. Dusty lost half his hand trying to cut a cable when the pods surged with electricity. Families huddled in root cellars while the sky above glowed sickly blue from alien machinery. Morale wavered. Some folks whispered about leaving, packing trucks and fleeing north. But Tom wouldn't hear it. "We run, we lose everything," he told the barn crowd, his voice rough. "This is our land. Our homes. Ain't no government coming to save us. Ain't no cavalry. Just us. You want to give it up to a bunch of bugs with glow sticks, be my guest. But I'll die on my porch before I hand it over." The barn erupted in shouts of agreement. Even those who'd thought of running straightened their shoulders. If Tom Weaver could stare down an alien armada with nothing but grit and a hunting rifle, then so could they. Jake, though, saw the cracks forming. They couldn't keep playing defense. For every pod they blew up, the aliens dropped 2 more. For every patrol they ambushed, reinforcements swarmed the skies. Mason County wasn't losing yet, but it was bleeding out. They needed something bigger. Something that would make the aliens rethink colonizing Earth entirely. That night, lying on the roof of the barn and staring at the stars, Jake whispered his thought aloud. "What if we don't just hunt 'em? What if we scare 'em?" He didn't know how yet. But he knew one thing, aliens or not, predators didn't stick around where prey fought back harder than expected. And Mason County wasn't prey anymore. The question was how much more punishment they could take before the whole county burned. And how much crazier they were willing to get. The first real battle began on a Sunday morning, just as church bells rang from the little white chapel in town. The congregation never got through the second hymn. A shadow rolled across the valley, blotting out the sun. Folks stepped onto porches, squinting up, and their blood ran cold. The mothership was moving, no longer hovering over the soybean fields, but crawling low across the hills like a monstrous crab, legs digging into earth and tearing trenches deep enough to swallow tractors. Pods dropped from its belly in clusters, smashing into pastures like meteor strikes. This wasn't scouting anymore. It wasn't quiet colonization. It was war. The mothership loomed over the Weaver farm first. Jake stood in the barnyard, rifle clutched in sweaty hands, watching cables punch into the soil like 100 drills. The farmhouse windows shattered from the pressure wave, chickens scattered in a frenzy, and the ground itself seemed to scream as blue fire spread through the roots of the cornfield. Tom Weaver limped out onto the porch, shotgun under his arm. "Well," he said dryly, "guess we're on the front lines." The aliens had brought their soldiers this time. Not the spindly workers, but hulking brutes, 6-limbed, armored in black plates, their shoulders bristling with mounted cannons. Their eyes glowed a furious red. They moved in formation, sweeping across the fields with military precision. Jake's stomach clenched. "They're not harvesting. They're hunting us." Before Tom could answer, a plasma bolt ripped through the barn, setting the hay ablaze. That was the signal. The weavers dove for cover as the hunters hidden in the woods opened fire. Muzzle flashes lit the tree line. High-caliber rounds cracked through the morning air, slamming into alien soldiers with enough force to stagger even their armored frames. Some toppled, hissing and thrashing. But many kept advancing, their cannons belching arcs of searing blue. The valley erupted into chaos. From his ridge, Earl took careful aim with his .50 cal rifle, an old heirloom meant for at impossible ranges. He exhaled, squeezed, and the bullet punched clean through an alien's chest plate, dropping it like a sack of meat. Dusty, crouched beside him with his mangled hand, let out a whoop. Hell yeah! But victory came at a price. 2 hunters in the cornrows were incinerated before they could reload. Plasma bolts chewed through trees, spraying splinters like shrapnel. The smell of burning wood, flesh, and ozone thickened the air until breathing felt like choking. Tom barked orders through a handheld radio. Keep 'em spread out. Hit their joints, not their shells. Make 'em bleed. Jake, crouched in a ditch, realized something vital. The aliens weren't just advancing blindly. Their formations were adapting, curling around hunter positions, driving them back toward open fields where cover was thin. They're hurting us, he hissed. And sure enough, as a squad of hunters broke for the tree line, a hornet ship swooped low, cutting them down in a spray of plasma. The aliens were learning fast. For every soldier they killed, 2 more seemed to crawl out of the mothership. Mason County's hunters were good, but they were running out of time, ammo, and luck. That was when Jake's half-mad idea from the week before slammed into his brain with terrifying clarity. If predators backed off when prey scared them enough, then it wasn't about just killing aliens. It was about terrifying them. He scrambled toward his uncle. Tom! We can't win straight up. But maybe we don't have to. Tom fired a shot, racked his pump, and grunted. Spit it out, boy, before we're ash. Jake pointed toward the mothership. They think we're primitive. They think this is just some backwater. What if we make them believe the whole damn planet is like this? That every human out here fights like Mason County? Tom's eyes narrowed. You're talking about a bluff. Not a bluff, Jake said, adrenaline shaking his hands. A show. We make this place look like hell itself. Fire, noise, chaos, hunting tricks cranked up to 10. We don't just fight. We make 'em think this land is poison, cursed, not worth talking. It was insane. It was reckless. But it was all they had. Tom gave a grim nod. Then let's turn Sunday service into the devil's own welcome party. The order went out over radios, walkie-talkies, and shouted across fields. Every trick they'd ever used on game, every crazy backwoods contraption gathering dust in barns, was dragged into play. Hunters doused fields in gasoline, and lit them with flaming arrows until walls of fire rolled through the crops. Diesel-soaked hay bales roared like bonfires, sending towers of black smoke into the sky. Old tractors loaded with dynamite were set rolling downhill toward the pods, detonating in thunderous blasts that rattled windows across the county. The aliens staggered, momentarily disoriented by the sudden inferno. But it wasn't enough. They regrouped, cannons swiveling toward the burning fields. Jake's crew wasn't done. Hidden speakers, wired together from every old truck stereo and busted PA system they could find, blared predator calls through the woods. Wolves howling. Cougars screaming. Bears roaring. The sounds bounced across hills, overlapping in an unholy chorus that made even human spines crawl. For the aliens, it was worse. Their red eyes flickered, heads jerking, mandibles clicking in what looked suspiciously like fear. Harlan, drunk but determined, climbed onto his roof with a hunting horn and blew it like Gabriel himself. Others followed, drums pounding, shotguns firing into the air. It was madness, pure chaos, a county of humans screaming into the face of an alien army with fire and fury. The aliens faltered. But faltering wasn't retreating. The mothership unleashed its trump card. With a screech like tearing steel, the entire front of the vessel split open. From the womb crawled something massive, taller than the church steeple, plated in obsidian armor that shimmered with heat. A war beast, bred for extermination. Its claws dug trenches as it reared, bellowing a sound so low it rattled the marrow in human bones. Jake's throat went dry. Oh, hell! The beast charged. Plasma cannons mounted on its shoulders spat searing bolts that reduced oak trees to ash. Its jaws clamped down on a silo, ripping it apart like paper. Hunters fired desperately, bullets pinging off its armor. It was unstoppable. Until Jenny Crawford, barely 16, clutching her daddy's old compound bow, stepped out from behind a hay bale. Her hands shook, but her eyes blazed with the kind of fury only someone who'd lost her home could carry. She drew back and let fly an arrow tipped not with steel, but with a stick of dynamite duct taped to the shaft. The arrow thunked into a seam under the beast's shoulder plate. A half-second later, it exploded, ripping a jagged hole in the armor. The beast shrieked, stumbling, ichor spraying like molten tar. "Hit the seams!" Jake roared. Dozens of hunters focused fire on the wound. More dynamite arrows flew. A jury-rigged potato cannon launched Molotovs. The beast howled and thrashed, but it couldn't withstand the onslaught. Finally, with a bone-shaking crash, it collapsed into the burning field, its body twitching before going still. Silence fell for half a heartbeat. Then Mason County erupted in cheers. But Jake wasn't celebrating. He was staring at the mothership. Its red eyes, if that's what they were, seemed to blink, slow and calculating. And then, to his horror, the ship began to rise higher into the sky, retreating just out of reach. They hadn't scared it off. Not yet. No, the ship was watching. Recording. Evaluating. Jake's gut twisted. They're not done. They're figuring out if we're worth the fight. He looked around at the exhausted, soot-streaked hunters, at the smoke pillars curling into the sky, at the wounded carried on stretchers made of doors. Mason County had held, for now. But the real fight was only just beginning. And if the aliens decided Earth was worth the trouble, then this battle was just a taste of what was coming. The field still smoldered by dawn, smoke curling into the pale sky like funeral pyres. Mason County looked more like a war zone than farmland, barns gutted, silos toppled, acres of corn blackened into ash. The warbeast's carcass steamed in the soybean field, flies already gathering on the cracks in its armor. And overhead, the mothership hovered like a storm cloud, silent and watchful, waiting for its next move. Nobody slept. The hunters gathered at Miller's barn again, this time limping, bloodied, and bone-weary. They laid the wounded on hay bales, packed burns with cold rags, poured whiskey down throats to dull the pain. Children clung to their mothers. Dogs paced nervously, sensing the unease in their owners. Jake stood at the center, his voice hoarse. "We can't do that again. Not like that. We barely held." No one argued. The truth was written in soot on their faces. Tom Weaver, his shotgun leaning against his chair, rubbed his temples. "We scared 'em some. Made 'em think twice. But that ship's still up there, watchin'. They'll come again. And when they do, they'll come harder." "So what then?" Miller asked, frustration cracking his voice. "We can't outgun 'em. We can't outrun 'em. What in God's name are we supposed to do?" The barn fell silent. For the first time, despair crept in. Then Jenny Crawford, her hair singed, her cheeks streaked with soot, stood up, clutching her bow. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence. "We don't scare 'em enough yet. We gotta show 'em the one thing hunters never show prey." Jake frowned. "What's that?" She looked him dead in the eye. "Cruelty." The word hung in the air. Jake blinked, and then it clicked. She was right. The aliens thought humans were just defending their land. Brave, yes. Dangerous, sure. But predictable. That wasn't enough. Predators didn't just avoid strong prey, they avoided prey that turned the hunt into a nightmare. Jake's lips curled into a grin that looked far too feral for a farm boy. "Then we stop fighting fair." Tom raised a brow. "You talking about making this place look like hell again?" Jake shook his head. "Not hell. A slaughterhouse." The plan came together in whispered urgency, scribbled maps, and desperate raids into barns for tools, fuel, and anything sharp enough to wound. If they were going to send a message, it had to be loud enough for the aliens to hear across the stars. That night, Mason County turned itself inside out. Every fence post became a spike. Every scarecrow was dressed in bloodied hunting gear, painted with glowing alien ichor scraped from corpses. The bodies of fallen aliens were hung like trophies at field edges, their mandibles propped open in grotesque grins. Fires burned in controlled rings, casting shadows that made the land look alive with writhing demons. Old church bells were rigged to ropes, tolling endlessly, their hollow clang echoing through the night. And then came the sounds. Speakers hidden in the woods played back recordings of the war beast's death cry, stretched and layered with pig squeals until it became an unholy cacophony. Drums pounded from hilltops, irregular and savage, like the heartbeat of some monstrous predator. Gunfire popped at random intervals, not at targets but into the sky, a storm of noise with no pattern the aliens could understand. To human eyes, it looked insane. To alien eyes, it looked like something worse, a planet that hunted back. When the mothership finally moved, dropping fresh soldiers into the fields, they hesitated. Their red eyes flickered as they scanned the grotesque landscape, mandibles twitching. The scarecrows, painted with ichor, glowed under their scans like enemy warriors waiting in the shadows. The bells clanged, the drums boomed, and the corpses seemed to whisper through the smoke. Then the real traps sprung. Tripwires yanked logs down from treetops, crushing squads. Fields soaked in gasoline erupted when flare guns fired, encircling alien units in rings of fire. Hunters hidden in the brush loosed arrows tipped with mason jars of hornets and wasps, shattering against alien armor. The insects swarmed, confused but furious, driving the aliens into a frenzy of panicked flailing. And all the while, rifle fire cracked from unseen nests, dropping them one by one. The aliens broke formation. For the first time, they weren't advancing with precision. They were stumbling, scrambling, firing wildly at shadows. They couldn't tell scarecrow from sniper, trap from corpse. Every sound was a threat, every flicker of movement a death sentence. The perfect predators, masters of their world, were unraveling in the face of something they couldn't categorize. Predators never stayed where prey made them feel hunted. On the ridge, Jake saw it happen, the shift. The aliens weren't fighting anymore. They were surviving. "Keep pushing!" he shouted over the radio. "Don't give him time to think!" The hunters obeyed. They pressed harder, every ambush crueler than the last. Dusty rigged car batteries to electrify barbed wire fences, frying soldiers that stumbled through. Harlan, half-drunk and cackling, charged with a chainsaw roaring, scattering 2 aliens into the fire before he tripped and rolled back laughing. Jenny loosed arrow after arrow, her dynamite tips carving holes in armor. The fields became a nightmare landscape of blood, fire, and shrieking metal. Finally, the mothership shuddered. Its red eyes pulsed once, twice, then dimmed. The soldiers on the ground froze, their mandibles clicking rapidly, then turned in unison. One by one, they scrambled back to the cables, hauled up into the belly of the beast. And then, with a sound like the air itself tearing, the mothership folded in on itself and vanished. Silence fell. For the first time in weeks, there was no hum in the ground, no buzz in the sky, no glow on the horizon. The aliens were gone. The hunters stood stunned, rifles still raised, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But none came. Only the crackle of dying fires and the distant bark of a dog. Tom Weaver broke the silence first. He spat tobacco into the dirt and muttered, "Well, I'll be damned. We scared the sons of bitches off." A cheer erupted, ragged and hoarse but fierce. Men slapped backs, women hugged their children, dogs barked madly as if sensing the victory. Jenny dropped to her knees, sobbing into her bow, relief finally breaking through her steel. Jake just stared at the empty sky. He knew this wasn't the end. The aliens would report back. They'd whisper warnings about Earth, about Mason County, about prey that didn't run but bit back harder than predators expected. Maybe they'd return one day with more firepower. Maybe not. But the message was clear: humans weren't livestock. They weren't easy prey. They were hunters, cruel, stubborn, and relentless. As the county gathered around bonfires that night, raising jars of shine and shaky toasts, Tom clapped his nephew on the back. "You done good, boy. Real good. Ain't every day you trick a damn army with scarecrows and hornets." Jake gave a tired grin. "Ain't every day an army tries to colonize Mason County." The laughter that followed was the kind only survivors could muster, half relief, half defiance, all human. By morning, the smoke began to clear. The county was battered, scarred, forever changed. But it still stood. And when word of what happened spread, as it surely would, maybe the rest of the world would understand the truth, too. You don't pick a fight with humans, not even the ones living quiet out in the sticks. Because some of us hunt for food. Some of us hunt for sport. But all of us, when pushed, will hunt for survival. And God help anyone who forgets that. The end.